discussion on supply chain resilience. So this semester's theme, kind of continuing along that line. So we've got anti-fragile supply chains. We've got our guest speaker tonight. So hopefully you enjoyed the refreshments out there. I told Aramark to leave them. So there will be some cooking. I got the head nod from Callie. Yes, there's more vegetables, correct? More vegetables? So leave the cookies, take the veggies away. Right, so we'll have that. So we're going to get up into the keynote here in a moment. But a couple of VIPs in attendance tonight. Our Dean, Arthi Ivanic, will be joining us shortly. She's probably triple booked this evening as we have some grad presentations going on as well. But we have one of our original operations management professors, Professor Narendra Simukadis, in the room. Some of you may know him. There he is. He's part of our operations and supply chain. We have Professor Steve Adler as well. Professor Chris Zach, project management. And Vicki, Professor Luo, thought it was Thursday instead of Tuesday. So she goes, I can't make it tonight. So she signed up, but she won't be here tonight. Right? And Irina, I don't think is going to be here. But we've got the core of our operations and supply chain faculty here. And with the launch of the program, really for the region here, we wanted to become the recognized source, right, of career-ready graduates, so very consistent with what UHART is trying to provide here, career readiness, right? And for us, just talking to some of the folks out in the foyer earlier, getting calls weekly to fill entry-level supply chain management positions, right? One of your peers, who's a finance major, actually had been taking some of the supply chain electives, decided to dual major and go finance and supply chain. Finance was completely saturated in terms of internships, switched to supply chain, found an internship in an instant. The openings are there. The field is actually very robust. And you have your, as Callie knows, she's taking one of the intro supply chain courses now, right? Quite the variety of work that you can do. So those of you who are interested in it, we get a lot of folks in the program who are doing dual majors or converting and adding as a minor. Max, dual major? See, Max. And Max has an internship, right, in supply chain with PressPurse, I believe, starting probably in 3 weeks. So again, another instance of where taking advantage of the opportunities that folks are coming to us with in terms of trying to fill internships. All right. So with that, I will introduce you to our speaker tonight, Anna McGovern. She's going to talk to you about who she is and her career in the supply chain world and really bridge the gap between, hey, here's what's going on in practice, and share some stories. And Anna will introduce herself and experience as well. Those of you in Management 320, right, there's an assignment tonight, and I'm not opening it up until after the keynote. So you'll have to pay attention, take virtual notes, scribble some things down, but it will be relevant to tonight's presentation. So with that, Great. Anna, switch over and we'll get you set up here.
I may be a little bit biased, but supply chain is the place to be. All right, do we have to switch the... There we go. Okay, terrific. Well, I'm glad you're all here. It was nice to meet so many of you out in the foyer. I'm thrilled to be here. There's industry leaders, and I just want to acknowledge Ross Story sitting in the back. So Ross is actually my mentor, my former boss at Unilever, and he's a huge enabler for why I like to think I've succeeded in supply chain. So thank you so much for being here, Ross. So why are we here? What are we going to explore today? What does anti-fragile supply chain really even mean? So let's get into it. But essentially, we're here to explore how we go from fragile, broken supply chains to resilient, responsive supply chains to anti-fragile supply chains that, if they break, the company still thrives. So here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. I'm going to introduce the 5 core concepts that are in my book, Anti-Fragile Supply Chains. And we're going to look at the tools, the practices, and some real-life applications of anti-fragility. And then to close it out, what does it really mean in the real world? So this is just sort of like a mishmash of where I've been. So you guys, I'm looking around the room. I've been doing this for probably twice as long as you've been alive. So I've spent 35 years in the global supply chain, essentially, in leadership roles across consumer packaged goods, beauty, food, nonprofits. I've worked through factory shutdowns. I've worked through hurricane evacuations, labor strikes, and yes, the pandemic. And I've seen what works. I've seen what breaks. I wrote the book to capture the lessons that can help all of us build better, stronger, and more adaptable supply chains. Been there, done that. So I've got dirt under my fingernails. So let's talk about the strategic context here. Before we dive into the how, let's talk about the why, right? The world that we operate in has changed significantly. Disruption is no longer the exception. It is the rule. And so how do we survive that? The next section sets the strategic stage. What is driving the need for anti-fragility, and what can we learn in moments of extreme disruption? So this isn't about tomorrow anymore. We're leading for today, and we're winning through change and disruption by essentially strong supply chains that bend, right? We bend and some of them break. That's what happened in the pandemic. But anti-fragile supply chains actually bounce back stronger than they were before they were bending, right? So, and according to a CEO survey by the Conference Board here in 25, they were asked, what is really on their mind? What keeps them up at night? And what they said was attracting and retaining talent, all right? So Professor Steck just talked about that you switched to supply chain, you got an internship just like that. The bottom line is we have to think differently about how we manage business, and people are the key that are going to help you guys do that. So the other thing that is on their mind is digital transformation. So AI and AI tools as an enabler to supply chain anti-fragility is top of mind. They're investing in it heavily. And they also want to improve the customer experience while at the same time containing costs. So if those are the 3 things that is keeping them up at night, it really tells me that it's about anti-fragile supply chains that are going to enable the success of these organizations. So why does anti-fragility matter? In today's supply chain environment, as I said, disruption is now the norm. Resilience is not enough. Companies must bounce back from every disruption stronger than ever. And you're going to hear me refer to the 3 R's a lot this evening. Anti-fragile supply chains allow you to respond to the disruption, recover as quickly as possible, and then renew itself so that it can avoid that bending and stretching going forward. So just remember the 3 R's. Respond, recover, and renew. So I'm going to talk about 9/11 for a minute. Why is 9/11 relevant? And I was starting to share with a few of you. I gave you a little snippet into this story. A couple of years ago, Memorial Day weekend, my husband and I caught this documentary on Prime, and it was called 26th Street Garage, the FBI's Untold Story of 9/11. And it explained, essentially, what happened leading to the attacks, or I should say, what didn't happen, which is that most of the agencies within the government were operating in silos. They weren't really communicating with each other. And there are many theories and debates, and this isn't about politics in any way, shape, or form. I'm here to talk about what are the implications for supply chains and for organizations today that we can learn from 9/11. So essentially what happened was that it wasn't the systems that failed. It was the interfaces. It was the failure at the handoff between agencies. So why does this matter and what can we learn? Here's my favorite track and field guy, Usain Bolt. It's really about don't let go until that baton is grabbed by the runner in front of you. Because it's at that interface where you win gold or you win silver, right? And so what does this mean? What are the takeaways for organizations? I'm just trying to figure out this mouse here, sorry. Oh, well, I can basically tell you. It's about resilience. Let me see if I can, oops, sorry. I don't know how to get the mouse. Is there a way to get the mouse, David? It's not letting me.
Oh, it's up on the screen. And what do you need?
Oh, okay. So I just need to go here.
Oh.
Is this a touch screen? Maybe I'll just.
No. Yeah, why isn't it coming over here?
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not flowing over.
Okay. So bottom line, communication and collaboration between departments is everything. Everything. Data and the visibility of data is everything, right? We say data is the new currency because if you've got raw data and you've got the means to turn data into information very, very quickly, the other thing to be in is data science, by the way. So that's the other area that's really important and so tied to supply chain. But essentially, it's about speed of decision making. So these are some of the takeaways. The fact that the government agencies were operating on their own in silos, basically just like taking the ball and throwing it off the wall, over the wall. They were not intertwined. What we learned, the key that we learned is that organizations need to be interdependent and not independent, right? In order to succeed, you need to have interdependency and collaboration. So essentially, this book has been 30 plus years in the making, right? Anti-fragile supply chains isn't just a new trend in business. The concepts that I cover in my book, there are 5 building blocks, 5 concepts. It's about building supply and geographic diversity. It's about strengthening supplier relationships because no one can succeed in isolation. It's about using AI insights to not only anticipate changes, but to act very, very quickly. 30 years ago, we weren't calling it anti-fragile supply chains. We didn't even have a name for it back then, but it existed, right? We learned that companies bounce back better when they're doing some of these things. And what we learned is that that is the differentiator. Companies that are using data management tools, that are using a diverse supply base, building resilience through risk mitigation plans, enhancing supply chain visibility. That is what we've been doing for I don't know how many years. We didn't call it that, but it existed, and that's what it was. So now let's get into the concepts, right? We went from core concepts that we've just discussed, and now we want to talk about capabilities. And how do we actually build an anti-fragile supply chain? There's tools, there's planning, there's real-world execution. Let's get into some of the characteristics. So here are the key characteristics of a resilient supply chain. Essentially, flexibility is about the ability to pivot and shift, right? So you change suppliers, you change logistics routes. You can't go by ship, you go by truck. You can't go by truck, you go by rail. It's about adjusting machines in the factory, all at speed in real time. It's about visibility. You can't act that fast unless you have insight into the data so that you can make decisions very, very quickly in real time. And it's not just about internal metrics, okay? It's about end-to-end visibility. So it's across the ecosystem of the supply chain, customers to suppliers. And finally, it's about collaboration. It's about all pulling in the same direction. When suppliers and partners are involved early, you solve problems before they become disruptions. And that's a critical point to take away. So what are the core themes, right? What are the core themes of an anti-fragile supply chain? There are 5 pillars, essentially. And if you practice these pillars, your organization is going to benefit from disruption. So part of it is proactive discovery, right? So how do you turn volatility into a supply chain advantage? I was talking to some of you out there during the pandemic. If you went into the grocery store, you can always guarantee that there was going to be Charmin toilet paper, Bounty paper towels, there was going to be Dove soap, right? Procter & Gamble, Unilever are 2 of the supply chain masters. What makes them different? Okay, what makes them different? I had the benefit of working for 23 years at Unilever. Some would say that I earned a PhD from my training there. And, and we took for granted what we were being taught, okay? And it wasn't until I left there that I realized how valuable that training was and what set apart these masters, right? So Gartner is the supply chain research firm that most of you probably know. They rank the top 25 supply chains every year, and they always nominate 5 who are in that master's category, right? And the ones that are up there are Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Apple, Amazon, and McDonald's, okay? Now, need I say more about the quality of the products that these companies put out? It's because of their supply chain as a key enabler. Now, partnerships. Let me talk about digital agility, and what does that mean? Using AI, okay, and AI is a ubiquitous term, okay, but like machine learning, predictive analytics, all of the subsets of AI. These aren't nice to haves. These are force multipliers. If we're not embracing them, and there are many of us that are older than me or younger than me that just shy away because they're so scared that AI is going to take away their jobs. If you don't embrace AI, you are going to be left behind. I don't have to worry about all of you. Partnerships. Innovation doesn't happen in isolation, right? How many of you guys drink a coffee using K-cups? K-cups. How many of you guys have a Swiffer in your apartments or dorm rooms? Okay. Do you guys know what is common between those 2 products? Those are classic examples of supplier-led innovation, okay? And Green Mountain Coffee changed the coffee industry. They changed the way we drink coffee. And Procter & Gamble changed the way we actually clean our kitchen floors. Those were supplier-led innovations that were brought to those companies. And that's what partnerships means. Supply chain isn't a cost center, it's actually a profit center if you can take that kind of a supplier-led event and turn it into a multi-billion-dollar, category advancement. And the next thing is about diversified resilience. How do you spread the risk, right? Before COVID, it was all about cost cutting. We were offshoring, we were building in China, building in India, all over the place because it was all about low-cost supply chains. Suddenly, it's about supply security and business continuity, right? So now it's about diversified resilience, our ability to respond. Okay, foundations of anti-fragile supply chains. Essentially, when we say anti-fragile supply chain, it's about risk management. It's about assessing risk, stress testing your supply chain models, right? And putting mitigation plans in place. I've already went on about the supplier collaboration. It's about going from transactional relationships with what is supplier A going to bid for my, my component versus supplier B. No, this is about long-term partnerships, getting married to them in a way, right? And having mutual growth together. And it's about digital transformation. What do I mean by digital transformation? It's about being able to connect people, data, and decisions in real time using technology. All right, so what I want you to take away from this slide is to go from resilience to anti-fragility, there are 7 essential elements. And think of these 7 as enablers that work together. So strategic sourcing, visibility, agility, and continuous improvement aren't standalone. They provide a feedback loop to the business. The goal is not to return to the baseline, but to elevate ourselves after a disruption. Each element supports the 3 R's. What are the 3 R's? Who can remember? Maybe that's one of Professor Steck's. It's respond, recover, and renew, right? So these 7 items are actually the enablers to respond, recover, and renew your supply chain. So what's the payoff? Why are we even talking about this, and why are we doing this, right? It's about delivering results that help you to respond, recover, and renew. This isn't just theory, folks. These are measurable business outcomes. It's about better cost management. It's about faster response time. It's about fewer surprises and better collaboration. And guess what? Visibility and risk mitigation don't ever show up on a P&L, all right? But they're massive impact, in terms of whether you're profitable or not. Okay, so this next section now shifts us from strategy to how we make it real. All right, we're going to explore a few tools, processes, and behaviors that drive anti-fragility. So capability and excellence today is about speed, adaptability, right? Being able to adapt quickly, and it's about sustainability. I mean, don't get me wrong. Key performance indicators matter. Okay, metrics absolutely matter. But the critical component here is about mindset shifts. Are you building a team that can thrive in ambiguity? Because living in ambiguity is a competency that we have to develop in our people. Right? How do we live without a clear set of rules? Here's a task list, follow A, B, C. It's like painting by numbers. This isn't painting by numbers. This is, you've got a blank sheet. Let's draw a beautiful painting. All right? And by the way, excellence in this context is not about perfection. It's about learning quickly, making decisions with 70% of the information, and then being able to act really, really fast. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about supply planning. I've got a philosophy, and I get into debates with colleagues all the time. Is it demand side or is it supply side? Well, I take the position that if you're going to be responsive, it has to come from the supply side, right? Planning isn't just a function. It's your risk engine. A supply chain plan is simply a calculation, right? So those people that are calculating demand and inventory and all of that, that's just a calculation. AI can do that. So then where's the value add from planning? A good planner is one who makes decisions based on changes in the plan and can respond very, very quickly. That's where the value of planning is. So AI enables us to save us time, right? They're going to create the plan for us. It's a calculation. So that frees us up to start adding value by how are we going to respond when the demand signal changes or market conditions change or there's an earthquake, there's a fire, there's a war that just broke out, right? So that's the value. Now, poor planning is going to mean excess inventory or lost sales or obsolete, throw it away because it's old. And smart planning is about being able to move very quickly with agility, and it's going to save money, right? It's going to create cash flow. Now, balancing demand, inventory buffers, production constraints is actually the source of a good supply chain plan. And so let's get into what buffer management actually means. Buffers are deliberate, okay? How many of you have heard the expression buffer? Have you guys learned about it? Okay, good. So buffers are deliberate. They're not defensive, okay? So making changes and adjustments in a dynamic fashion and then decoupling the points of inventory to keep the flow moving is what it's all about. So so basically let's pretend, we make iPhones, all right? Now think of how many things are in my iPhone here. How many components? I've got a case, I've got a glass cover, and then I've got the actual iPhone. It's got chips and all kinds of components. Now let's just pretend that the chip that's inside this iPhone has a 16-week lead time, but everything else has a 2-week lead time. So what's my inventory strategy? Do I hold 16 weeks of iPhones in inventory? Or do I hold 16 weeks of all of the various components? No. What I do is I create a buffer for that one component. I keep enough stock, okay, to buffer against that cycle time, right? And I keep the process moving. And then I've now segregated my one issue, and I've minimized the amount of dollars I'm actually investing, right? That's a real example of how we can decouple components to try and drive better inventory management. Now, real-time visibility and cross-functional planning are all about buffer effectiveness. There goes that expression again, data, visibility, collaboration. Those are going to repeat over and over again. This isn't brain surgery, folks. It's common sense. But common sense is really hard to execute, okay, when we're not working together. So let's go on to the next thing. How many of you have heard about demand-driven planning or demand-driven materials planning? Is that something you guys cover in your classes?
Next semester.
All right, good deal. So look, traditional MRP, material requirements planning, traditional MRP is actually a forecast push, right? Essentially, we're making to forecast. Whereas DDMRP, demand-driven material requirements planning, is a real-time pull. Okay, it's being able to act in real time based on customer orders or changes in the forecast. And you make your plans based on what the demand is saying rather than here's the forecast or here's what we think we're going to make based on history, right? It aligns inventory with actual demand signals. And this reduces overproduction and improves the production flow or the material flow at all stages of the supply chain. This is especially impactful in industries where you've got like a high mix and variable demand. So think like cosmetics, for example, or think iPhones, or think shampoo and soap. Those are high mix, lots of SKUs. Fast-moving consumer goods is another way of describing it. That would be applicable in this industry, not like Pratt & Whitney engines, for example, Okay, so what are the applications of DDP, so demand-driven planning, and DDMRP? You're able to have much greater agility, right? Respond faster to real-time demand. It optimizes the inventory. It reduces waste and frees up cash, and it will create improved service levels. So you'll have the right inventory in the right place at the right time, right? That's supply chain 101. And finally, there's collaboration once again, because more accurate data is going to actually help strengthen trust with your suppliers. So theory is really cool, right? Theory is very important, but application is everything. So here's how organizations are using some of these principles and the results that they're seeing. So I work with a lot of clients that are in packaging or consumer packaged goods. I can't talk specifically about current clients, but everybody is like knocking down my door. Tariffs. Oh my gosh, tariffs, what are we going to do about tariffs? Well, tariff shocks will mean supplier and cost disruption. We applied DDMRP and supplier diversification to mitigate risk for one of my clients who's a food packaging supplier. They make egg cartons, they make the trays that you buy your chicken and your beef in. I mean, so these guys are using resins and they're importing from all over the globe. So when we applied inventory segmentation and customer segmentation, and we don't like to talk about this too much, but not every customer is created equal, right? So like, for example, Amazon and Walmart are not going to be the same as like Stop and Shop or, Best Buy. They've got much bigger scale, so you're going to give them higher priority. So we've got a proper way of segmenting customers into A, B, and C. We take everything that we sell and we segment inventory into A, B, and C, and then X, Y, and Z is about the predictability of demand that goes with it. And we implemented that kind of an XYZ, ABC XYZ methodology along with DDMRP to diversify and mitigate some of their risks. The outcome was much better inventory, fewer stockouts, and much more responsiveness. They took their lead time to their customers from 6 weeks down to 14 days, 2 weeks, essentially. But let me say a word about tariffs and what does that mean? We're talking about tariffs at a global scale like this. It's not anything that I know about or Dr. Steck knows about. We haven't seen anything like this for 50 years. I mean, there is no precedent for this. And sometimes the best strategy and the best action to take is to not take any action at all, right? A good planner sometimes knows when to just hold tight and wait for the noise to just quiet down. But let's face it, we are going to get impacted. And so it's about how do we cut our losses. It's about having a containment strategy. Let's contain the costs and let's avoid as much of the cost upcharge as possible by doing some of these anti-fragility things. We don't know what we don't know right now, all right? So what we need is for Trump to have like a really big win because some country is going to come and negotiate with him and say, yup, and he's going to say, yup, my tariff strategy is working, and then maybe some of this uncertainty and ambiguity will go away around tariffs. But, what I want you guys to know is that this isn't a one-time fix. This isn't, let's do this one exercise, let's go book a conference room somewhere and build, an antifragile supply chain strategy. This is a discipline. Just like, eating healthy, just like, taking care of yourself personally. It's exercise. You've got to have this discipline of doing this repeatedly. It's a muscle that you need to create, and you need to be able to do this routinely. You've got to collaborate deeply, you've got to plan dynamically, and you got to assess risk on a regular basis and adjust. So, wash, rinse, repeat is how you have to think about this. These habits of building this, supplier collaboration, agile planning, risk assessment, is really how you build institutional strength. And then supplier partnerships are the innovation engine for any organization. I've already talked about Keurig. I've talked about Swiffer. Let me tell you about All Small and Mighty. Do you guys know All Detergent? Okay, so that detergent used to be a category that Unilever was into. And Walmart was getting a black eye a few years ago. We're talking about 15 years. Walmart thought that they weren't sustainable. So they wanted to drive their sustainability agenda. They wanted to be green. They wanted to try and drive better green initiatives for the planet and so on. They approached Procter & Gamble, who makes Tide. Okay, Tide is like 60% of the market share in laundry detergent, at least in the United States. And they wanted a more concentrated liquid. And Procter & Gamble said, no, thank you. Even though Walmart is like the biggest customer, suppliers have all the power sometimes when they've got that kind of market share. So Unilever was a distant number 2, right? And so they came to Unilever and they said, will you concentrate detergents? And Unilever says, sure, of course. I was in my first role as a senior procurement manager, and I thought I was the cat's meow, right? Because we were, trying to do all kinds of things around going from traditional purchasing to more like supplier management and procurement. And so I remember the innovation manager came up to me and she said, you know what, we're going to be doing this test market and we need to air freight, I can't remember how many bottles, from the UK to the US to be able to fill this test. Just the freight charges alone, okay, we're going to be $1 million. And of course I blew a head gasket because I'm incentivized to keep costs down. And so what am I saying? I'm saying, well, what's the volume? There's no way we're going to spend this kind of money. I took the exact old school way of thinking about how we're going to actually make this happen. We're going to spend $1 million on air freight. And then I remember the head of supply chain, a guy by the name of Alan Raleigh, my favorite Scotsman. He took me into his team leadership meeting, and he basically explained to me, we have an opportunity to deliver $100 million of revenue this year. Will you take $1 million bet to get $100 million in revenue? I looked very foolish when he asked me that question. Of course, who wouldn't take that bet? And sure enough, I started to believe, and then I had to convince the supplier that they needed to believe. I drove for 9 hours in one day from Connecticut over to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to the key supplier to tell them that we needed their A-team. And I had to convince them, the supplier, why they should believe in us. That's what partnerships are about. It wasn't like, I'm the customer, so you have to do what I say. This was about helping them see that there was shared growth between us. And sure enough, we made the project happen. Sure enough, we delivered $100 million in revenue in year 1. And that allowed us to sell the laundry business. We took the gross margin of that particular business. We took it from 30% gross margin to 44%. And we were able to sell this business very healthily because it was hard to compete in laundry against Procter & Gamble. But I wanted to give you that example, real life example that I've lived about how partnerships create value, right? It's not about looking at the $1 million in freight, right? It's about $100 million in revenue. So you got to go beyond price, okay? You got to learn to co-develop and co-invest, co-solve problems, and build relationships together for mutual growth. Mutual KPIs drive mutual commitment, right? So it really is like a marriage. Now, AI-enabled supply chain management. I just want to give you a few examples of what some big companies are doing. So regarding demand forecasting, Walmart uses AI to analyze store-level data patterns that improves their shelf-level demand forecasting and reduces stockouts. They're also using AI to do real-life negotiations. They're using AI to run first and second level negotiations. Now, Amazon uses AI to do route and fuel cost optimization. So they're constantly adjusting so they get the most efficient route and they get the best fuel costs using AI, and they can respond in time. GE applies AI for sensor data on equipment that that basically can predict when failure is going to happen in advance, and so this minimizes unplanned downtime in the factory. Unilever uses machine learning to adjust safety stock in real time, to adjust safety stock and reorder points dynamically. So they're able to improve their service signal while reducing their inventory working capital investment. And finally, Johnson & Johnson uses AI to track supplier financials, geopolitical risks. They know where the hot points are across the globe. And they also can sense social media sentiment around their products so that they can identify early warning signs of disruption and act proactively. So these are just some of the examples of why AI is so critical in supply chain management. And by the way, it's a key enabler to antifragility. It's not about replacing humans, it's about amplifying decision-making and how they can deliver. And then finally, my concluding remarks. I want you guys to build your capabilities as you begin your careers, as you look forward to the future across people, processes, and technology. They go hand in hand. Be a student for your entire life. Always be learning and not just managing supply chains. Understand the dynamics that drive your business. And your network and your adaptability will define your impact. Just remember, anytime there's a networking event like this, don't miss a chance to attend, because it's who you know to get in and what you know to stay. It's extremely important. And finally, in a world of constant disruption, the supply chain isn't just about being resilient, okay? They're anti-fragile because they respond, recover, and renew. That's the secret of anti-fragility. It's about bouncing back stronger. And with that, I want to thank you for allowing me to come in and talk to you. I hope you learned something. I'll stick around if you have any questions about anything, maybe give you some cheat sheets and some extra notes so that you guys can ace that assignment tonight. All right, so thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Deals in many, many, many categories: laundry and clothing and tires and batteries. And so they usually are, they do a category management approach. So every category has people that are working on it. And, basically they created the original supply chain, right? Back in the day when they were partnering with Procter & Gamble to do everyday low pricing, right? Because if you have promotions, you're never going to get it right. And so you basically, if it's a detergent problem, you address that particular problem. If it's a cosmetics problem, you address that. If it's, their food business, you address that. So you just have to listen to what their issues are, and they'll point you in the right direction. But yes, you approach things from a cross-functional standpoint. Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay, great. Callie.
Hey, look at that.
What's some of the best skills or
Okay, so what I will say about software is it doesn't matter because it's going to change in 6 months, a year. So what characteristics or what competency should you have? Always be curious, okay? Always be curious. Always listen for the question that's being asked, okay? I really don't care how good you are, okay? You're going to talk to me about how good you are. I care about, I've got a pain point, I've got a problem, I've got an ache in my elbow, and you're talking to me about new shoes. I want you to address the pain in my elbow. And the way you're going to do that is think about problem solving first. Doesn't matter what tool you're going to use. If you understand the problem, you're going to know to grab a screwdriver instead of a set of pliers if you're going to, like screw in a nail or something, right? So it's about understanding and listening to what the problem is and always be curious, right? And always be a student, always be learning, and always be a team player, right? And if you have those kinds of characteristics, you're going to succeed every time. And the most important thing is find mentors that are going to guide you. Right? Find mentors that are going to guide you. A lot of companies have formal programs, but it's the informal relationships that are going to help you, right? Find somebody that you admire and emulate them, and then go up to them and ask them for their time. There's nothing more flattering than when you say, Callie, will you give me a few minutes of your time? I have a couple of questions. You'll never have anyone say, no, I don't want to help you. Okay, in fact, they're flattered and they want to help you. So mentorship is critical as you start your career.
I have a question. Could you tell us a little bit more about your journey when you went to Pennsylvania to convince the supplier? How did you do that? Was it technical?
It was,
soft skills? Or was it?
It's a combination. It's interesting because I often tell people that I'm mentoring or I'm advising, even clients, I tell them, you're not in supply chain, or if you're in procurement, you're not really in procurement. You are wearing so many hats, okay? So these days, okay, because to be a customer of choice, after COVID, suppliers were firing customers, right? So you have to be a customer of choice. And how do you do that? It's about shared benefit. And so I had to put on my sales hat that particular day. And it was 9 hours in a car because it was 4.5 hours each way, right? I went there for a 2-hour meeting. I was with our engineering director, Phil Glassman, right? We drove and we were like, okay, what are we going to do to convince these guys? This was a strategic bottle supplier, right? And Unilever had a history of failed innovations. And this particular supplier had gotten burned a couple of times. So what we had to do to convince them is, look, we need your A-team on this. Well, why should we believe you this time? And we had to do a sales pitch, just like Alan did with me to convince me that I was being foolish. And I just basically, like what I do is I tell the truth, right? And I let data speak. So I basically said, now, big companies usually go for suppliers where they're number one, right? Like so like my strategy was to go with suppliers where I was going to be the number one or number two customer. So this particular supplier was not servicing Procter & Gamble, who was the key competition. So essentially I said, look, Walmart went to Procter and Procter told them to go pound sand. They came to us and we're like, sure, we'll do it. We're the number two challenger. So we're scrappy, we're customer focused, we're not arrogant like the big guy, right? They were the sleeping giant and we came in and woke them up. So I explained that whole scenario and I basically shared my humility in terms of how I got undressed in a conference room by my VP, who was basically making me look foolish because I was worried about $1 million freight bill when we had the opportunity to deliver $100 million. I shared that. I had the humility to share that, And that authenticity allowed them to believe me, right? And so they bought in. They bought in, and I got a big plaque, with a bottle of All Small and Mighty plastered to it. And it was, whether I was in manufacturing or planning or procurement, if I count every major career highlight, it had to do with partnering with a supplier. So just my direct experience. I don't know if it's like that everywhere. Yes, sir.
So I really enjoyed your slide on AI and how AI is coming into every aspect of the supply industry. Do you associate any negative impacts with AI? I saw
Absolutely.
that it was more of a force to amplify the current state of supply chain and logistics, but do you see any future negative effects, or do you see any present negative effects?
So there's a huge ethical debate about the use of AI and what it can do, right? And, basically leaders, senior leaders have to be very cognizant of that. The other thing is there's a whole large number of employees that are fearing for their lives because they think they're going to be replaced. What's the way to avoid that? You constantly have to upskill, right? If you don't upskill and if you don't continually raise the bar and learn something new, you're gonna become obsolete. And I can tell you that there are jobs that are going away. For example, if you are in the business of issuing purchase orders or reconciling invoices against purchase orders, your job has gone away. I can tell you that Unilever, who implemented AI-driven planning tools and has been doing it for a while, but they just recently eliminated transactional planning, right? Do you remember when I was saying that planning is a calculation? So we used to employ large numbers of people. That's how I got hired, right? I used to calculate all kinds of plans. And now machines can do that for you. So large groups of people's jobs were absolutely eliminated last fall, right? And so only strategic roles are now, how do I optimize the network? Should I be sourcing from this distribution center, or is it cheaper to go into that lane out of Texas? So there are ethics in terms of how we use it. There's a whole lot of cybersecurity and, lots of issues around, data identity losses and all of that. I can tell you that for the last 3 weeks, I've been dealing with fraud in my business account, right? I've had to close my account, and there were all kinds of transactions that were happening that are easily enabled because there are so many AI tools out there now that can break passwords within seconds, literally, right? So you got to have these long passwords in order not to break the code. And I use the same password, every day for the last, 40 years or whatever it is. So those are some of the issues that we need to think about. And then it's always about change management. How do we convince our employees that this is for their own good? But they obviously have to have a little bit of skin in the game, right? And it's about upskilling and getting better. So when I say be a student, and when I answered Callie saying software doesn't matter, that's because there's always going to be the next best thing, right? So therefore, keep up and keep learning. And hopefully, we're going to survive this. Does that answer the question around the negatives?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Anna, great program.
Thank you.
From your perspective, where's ESG in importance with respect to integration in the RFP process, or SPM, or anywhere in the life cycle? Where is it now, and where do you think it's going to go?
I learned a long time ago from Unilever's longtime CEO, Paul Pullman, that doing good is actually good for business, right? So ESG continues to be at the forefront, current administration notwithstanding, right? we have to do better, and we have to be able to integrate it, okay? So this was when, I spent half my career in procurement. And, doing better for the environment and, basically corporate social responsibility is a huge part of the agenda. So do you do it at the cost of business? It's still a capitalist society, and you need to be able to do it the right way. But it's all about who's defining the supply chain. So is it lip service, okay, or is it really people driving change? Now, I'm proud to say that at Unilever, they invested first in a lot of ESG initiatives, okay? Like, for example, the palm oil supply chain, making sure it was sustainable and traceable. Procter & Gamble didn't do that, okay? They are very good at marketing, as an example. There are a lot of companies that will pay lip service, okay? I will tell you, for example, this business about getting away from plastics, right? And we're gonna get away from plastics and ocean plastics and all of that. I have a former supplier who was a CEO, he's long retired, CEO of one of the major plastics bottling companies, right? And there was a big push, and he said to me, I said, what's gonna happen, Phil? Is this real? Like, are we really getting away from plastic? And he said, oh, Anna, I've been through this like 5 times. And I said, well, tell me. He's like, no, we're never gonna get away with it. He told me that he got called by Pepsi in purchase, right? And I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I'm not using his name. He got called to a meeting in a conference room with Pepsi, and who's sitting across in the same conference room but the chief procurement officer of Coca-Cola? Okay, so they're colluding essentially to say, look, because think about what has to change for some of these big companies. So you try to do the right thing, you try to contain it, but it's never going away, all right? But, okay, if you want to do business with Europe, you've got to pay attention. If you've got to do business with companies that are trying to sell to millennials and to Gen Z, consumers pay attention. And it's the consumer who's going to drive the change, right? So it's the millennial mom who doesn't want these parabens inside, the products that she's giving her family that's going to dictate the change. At the end of the day, companies are not going to change unless they have to. And it's us consumers that are going to drive that.
Hi, I'm Jess.
Hi, Jess.
I'm a marketing major, and so I'm just curious to know your opinion on the impact supply chain has on marketing industry, or how knowledge of supply chain can help me as a marketer.
Yeah, so essentially, you make the promises that your supply chain colleagues will have to keep, right? So it's about brand positioning, right? So, for example, I was just talking about palm oil. So Unilever makes Dove soap, right? And Dove is not really a soap. It's this chemical process that Dr. Ross over there can probably talk a lot more about what makes it up. He's got a PhD in chemistry. So, but essentially, palm oil is one of the essence. And so Dove was leading the way to sustainability. Let's market these two thoughts together here. So it was a marketing-driven initiative that basically was saying, we're going to have sustainable palm oil that is traceable and certified. And that was going to cost a fortune, but that was a brand equity investment they were willing to make. Similarly, you may have seen all of the, campaigns for real beauty that are attached to Dove. Google some of those campaigns. They're absolutely fabulous. So it's about building brand equity by creating a brand with a purpose, right? And so when we do that, who's going to be putting the product out into the marketplace? It's supply chain. So supply chain starts with what is the business strategy? How does that translate into an annual plan? How does that translate into a supply chain plan? And then you keep bringing it down, a manufacturing plan, a materials plan, and so on. So marketing and supply chain, you guys are like joined at the hip. There was a question over here.
One more?
Sure. I would be interested, after working at Unilever for so long, what were some of the things that they did to decrease inefficiencies? It's like a lot of us are from the operations class, which kind of goes hand in hand. So we talk about Lean and Six Sigma, like thought processes. So speak to that.
Yeah, so there was this continuous improvement mindset in everything that we did, right? There were step changes, and then there were the incremental changes, the getting better by a little bit every single day. So one of the programs that Unilever worked on in manufacturing, for example, is, when a line stops, there's like major breakdowns, and the line is down for hours or days. But it wasn't that they concentrated on. So using TPM principles, lean principles, they started to measure the minor stops. Like what happens when a line stops for 10 minutes because of a jam several times a day, right? It's like nobody is looking at the 10 minutes, but then 10 minutes after 10 minutes after 10 minutes, it begins to add up. So it's about looking at minor stoppages. Was an example of TPM, okay, total preventative maintenance, and lean principles as an example. And Unilever did that in everything that we did. So whether you're in accounting, how can you do your job more efficiently? How do you implement safety, inside the office environment? You don't leave drawers open. You have standing desks so you're not sitting for too long. So it was this constant shift, okay, and maybe Ross wants to take a gander answering it, because he was in quality, global quality for years, and quality isn't just about quality control in a factory. It's about a quality mindset in everything that we do, and that's what, to me, distinguished Unilever from many other companies. Want to answer any more?
I'll have a chat afterwards.
Okay, that's great.
Take another 30 minutes.
All right. Is
Anna,
that it?
just a little something as a token
Thank
of
you.
our appreciation.
Appreciate it. Thank
The
you so
supply
much.
chain at the bookstore.
That's great. Thank you
I
so much.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.